coming up on this episode of the New Money Habits podcast.
But she's clearly communicating, I'm overwhelmed and I don't know a healthier path forward.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Hey there, budgeteers. The new year is here, and you know what that means. It's time for fresh starts and new habits. If one of your goals is to get better with your money, New Money Habits has exactly what you need to kick things off right, the Payday Power Planner. This isn't just any budget tool. The Payday Power Planner is designed to work with your pay periods, not just the calendar month. Why does that matter? Because it helps you to see exactly when your money is coming in and going out. No surprises, no guesswork. With the Payday Power Planner, you'll know if you're working with a surplus or facing a deficit, so you can make informed decisions about your money. It's not just a plan, it's the clarity and control you've been looking for to start the new year strong. Make this the year you finally build new habits for financial freedom. Grab your free Payday Power Planner from New Money Habits today and take the first step toward a better financial future. Visit newmoneyhabits.com now, because this year it's time for a better plan for your money.
Let's tee up for today what we got going on. So there's a large Facebook group that we help to admin, and so I decided that I saw some trends taking place over there that I thought, hey, you know what? These are trends that our listeners would probably enjoy, or not necessarily enjoy. First of all, they would relate to, like, ooh, yeah, I can relate to that, and therefore would enjoy us kind of addressing. And because it has to do with mental health, and because it has to do with the way people perceive and think, I thought, who better to help me to address some of the posts that we're seeing? We're going to address a single post in a theme, but I was like, yeah, who better? I want my partner in crime, Maria, to come and help us dissect what's really going on with these posts, or posts like these. All right. So just yesterday, Heather in our group posted about her mental health, or like a post kind of tying to her mental health and how she's processing spending and all the things that she's dealing with. So I'll read the post and then we'll kind of dissect it a little bit here. So Heather wrote, "My biggest challenge is emotional eating." And I guess that means specifically takeout. So she goes on to say that in November, my last child was born. So it sounds like she has a newborn on her hands. December, we had a death in the family. So always tough to deal with loss. January, family had a wedding and a funeral. So I'm assuming the funeral probably had to do with the December passing, but maybe not. But a celebration and some mourning. And then she goes on to say, and I have stupidly emotionally spent on food because I'm just so overwhelmed. Hoping things will pick up in February when I start my no spend and trying to lose weight, but anxious over my mental health at the moment. How do you stop emotional spending? So before you start to address that, I want to let our listeners know that the intent here is not to necessarily answer the question, how do you stop emotional spending? Although we may do that. I think it's more important that we actually take a look at what's going on in this post. And what is Heather really struggling with?
Yeah, I'm glad that that's the direction you want to take, Nino, because there were certainly some thoughts that came to mind as I was hearing you read it and as I was following along. First off, I want to make sure that your listeners know you did preface this by saying that it's part of a bigger group that we are helping to admin, but I don't believe that you mentioned what the name of that group is. And I think it's important here just so it can provide context for our listeners. And that is the No Spend 2025 challenge or something like that. Maybe 2025 No Spend challenge, whatever it is. The words no spend are in there. And the reason that that's important is because I see that she actually used that verbiage in her post here. So that is important to me, because one of the first things I'm seeing is that she's talking to a specific audience and speaking. Now, this is just me wondering. I don't not analyzing her. I don't really know her. But I would look at this going, she's speaking with the language that she believes the group would either relate to or would like her to speak in. I see that, for example, the word stupidly. Now, I don't know if she believes that some of this stuff is stupid or if that she is kind of beating them to the punch, if you will, that she does this stuff, in a way, and that she figures that these people who are in this group are going to say it's stupid. So I'm going to just let them know ahead of time. Yeah, I already got this. I know that that's the case. So that's one of the first things that I see. I see a couple other things, but before we go into that, what are some of your reactions to that?
Yeah, no, like thank you. It was eye-opening because while I also caught the word stupidly, and I thought to myself, I wonder if she feels like she's being foolish. More to your point, I didn't think about the context of the name of the group, the other types of interactions that are taking place, where to use your words, she had to beat them to the punch. Like I'm going to be deprecating, and I'm going to call myself stupid before you have an opportunity to call me stupid, which I would not have picked up on, and now I'm getting a little annoyed that somebody would have to feel like they have to qualify it, where it's like I would genuinely want to know, does she feel like her spending is stupid and she feels foolish and that's the thing she wants to address, or again she's just doing it because of the context of the group and the conversations that are
Yeah,
taking
and
place.
I don't know, but if she listens, she can let us know if she hears this.
Hmm.
But that is something I see, and I don't know. I mean, we've talked on here, Nino, about how we're kind of word snobs sometimes, and I don't mean it, and I don't mean it in a
Very
way where
much.
like we have a super sophisticated vocabulary, because I'll tell you, there are times when my brain function is so low that I'm like, I can't even find the very simple word that I'm trying to get. So it has nothing to do with that. What I think you mean when we say that we're word snobs is that words matter, and that when we write
Mhm.
something, there is usually something underlying, some underlying meaning behind what we write. Sometimes it's conscientious and sometimes it's not. But for example, I see the word because in the second paragraph here where it says, and I have stupidly emotionally spent on food because I'm just so overwhelmed. And it's like she's already showing that it's not stupidly spending, it's because she's overwhelmed. And when we're overwhelmed, that seems to be her go-to. That is the reaction to feeling overwhelmed. And I believe you and I have talked on here before about apathy spending. I don't know, but that was just a fancy way of saying the effort spending, right?
That you
Yes,
affectionately
exactly.
call
Okay,
effort
so we have
spending.
talked about that.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like that effort spending. Like, I'm so overwhelmed and I don't know how to handle or react to that emotion. And so I'm going to do this thing over here, even though she understands that that doesn't make logical sense. And maybe that's what she means by stupidly emotionally doing it. Maybe it's not a preemptive, I'm going to beat them to the punch. Maybe it's just her way of saying it's illogical. And I think you mentioned the word foolish earlier, and those two things kind of go hand in hand. So anyway, that was all just from one line in here.
Yeah. It's so funny because I was gonna say, like, I don't want to like dissect this one sentence to death, but I will tell you, like, it is interesting. Like you said, we're word snobs in the sense that we believe words matter, and we understand communication is hard, and so it's like, what are you trying to communicate? And sometimes there is that underlining message. I usually like to ask, what's the question behind the question? Like, why are you even asking this question? And so I'll just say, like, the part that she's clearly communicating is that she's overwhelmed. The part that's a little bit more muddied is how she feels about the spending she does when she's overwhelmed, whether she thinks it's foolish or she was being preemptive. That's the part that's muddied. But she's clearly communicating, I'm overwhelmed and I don't know a healthier path forward.
Yeah, I agree with that. Speaking of the healthier path forward, she looks forward in the very next line by saying, hoping things will pick up in February when I start my no spend and trying to lose weight, but anxious over my mental health at the moment. So there's a few things going on here, and it relates back to one of the other things that I noticed. And one of the things that seems to be going on here is the word hope. So it kind of allows there to be this, like, I haven't really committed to something. Like, I'm just kind of throwing it out there. I hope that this is going to happen. Hope that things will pick up. And then it says, when I start my no spend. So she does kind of commit to the idea of starting a no spend. And then she uses the word but, which is something that as human beings, we tend to accidentally use on a regular basis, even if you're being aware of it. And I had a mental guy, I say mental guy, he was technically a what do you call it? A hypnotist. Oh, see, I told you, I don't really know the words half the time. He was a hypnotist, and he really walked me through the one time where he talked about how we hypnotize ourselves to the way that we talk sometimes. And he said, anytime you catch yourself saying the word but, try to just change that out with the word and see if it makes sense. And if it makes sense, great. But oftentimes, see, like I said, but oftentimes it doesn't make sense to put those two things together. You all will sometimes be saying, I'm going to do this, and then you negate everything that you just said when you use the word but. And so I think it's interesting that right now she says, but anxious over my mental health at the moment. So really what she's saying here, to your point earlier, Nino, is that her focus is about her mental health. It's about that feeling of overwhelm. And yet there's this underlying pressure, maybe, whether it's true pressure or just self-imposed, to do this no spend, to say, I'm not going to spend foolishly anymore. And even to do the losing of the weight. That sounds like that's something that she kind of feels obligated to do, even if there is an underlying true desire for her to do that. It's interesting, as you were reading, I saw, and it's just the way that she has it listed out. It's easier to see, but she listed November, December, January. Like, there's all these things that happened in those specific months. And because she listed them one on top of the other, my mind was able to go, oh, this is like one month after another. And isn't it interesting that the change is going to be in February? Because I think she's kind of hoping that there's not going to be any of this really impactful, life-changing event that takes place in February. So there's two things that I want to say to that. One, we just don't know. I mean, I really hope for this poster's sake that there isn't any, death in the family again, that they don't have any major change like having to move or anything like that. Hopefully nobody gets really sick. I don't know if she probably is not going to have another baby right now. But I also know that, having been a mom several times, there are months of emotional roller coaster rides, years even, depending on what stage your child's in, that will be very overwhelming. It's not as simple as saying, as long as this other outside circumstance doesn't happen to me, it's all going to be different. And so I do believe that addressing how she deals with the overwhelm will be one of the real things that she wants to do, rather than just feeling like she has to not spend and, lose this weight.
Hey there, budgeteers. It's a brand new year, and that means it's time for new habits, starting with your money. Take charge of your finances in 2025 with New Money Habits Financial Coaching. This isn't your typical financial advice. New Money Habits is all about giving you the knowledge, tools, and support to make confident money moves and build a rock-solid financial foundation. Here's the deal. We're offering a free discovery session to kick off your journey to financial freedom. That's right, no strings attached. In this session, one of our expert coaches will help you to identify your financial goals and create a better plan for your money. We'll help you master your money mindset, sharpen your money management skills, and keep you accountable every step of the way. Make 2025 the year you say goodbye to financial stress and hello to the freedom you've been dreaming about. Schedule your free discovery session today and start creating the new money habits you need to achieve financial freedom.
Yeah, I think to your point, this cadence of November, this happened, December, this happened, January, this happened, but February, I'm going to break free of all of that, and that's when I'm going to be able to focus on something. I think we talked recently, even on just like the New Year's episode, about like we don't have to necessarily wait until a Monday or the first of the month or any of that stuff to kind of make a commitment. And so while her focus is her mental health, and I believe that she should be thinking about what's the best way to address that, to, for lack of a better word, right? Even though I'm a word snob like you, sometimes you just can't come up with the better one. For lack of a better term right now, I'll say, at the risk of fooling herself, that she is going to have a emotion regulating February.
Mhm.
You just don't know, right? And so if you're feeling overwhelmed now, and if your mental health is either like under attack or just fragile at the moment, I'd rather encourage Heather here to come up with a plan for moving forward in a healthy way, rather than thinking, oh, things will finally calm down in February, and I won't be under so much overwhelm and stress and anxiety, and so it's going to kind of figure
Mm.
itself out. No, I'd rather encourage her to figure out how to manage all the overwhelm, which I think is
Yeah,
what she's
I was just
actually
gonna say
asking,
that.
right?
Yeah.
She ends the post. Yeah, she ends the post with, how do you stop emotional spending? But really what I think she's asking is, how do you manage the overwhelm? And when life is coming at you, and life can come at you and knock you down over and over and over again. And it's like, where do we muster the will to get back up and to go at it again? And how can we manage all that overwhelm, in a healthy and productive
Yeah.
way?
And so I really appreciate that she wraps it up with that question, because I think that there is that underlying assumption that she realizes that it is the overwhelm, the emotional, like that's what she uses. She says, how do you stop emotional spending? There is a recognition that there is that emotion that she's struggling with. And I think that there, I think this might be like she realizes that her reaction is spending. So there's, whether she recognizes it or not, there is the understanding that there's a connection between the way that we think and believe and the way that we behave, the way we react to something. And so she's using it as a more of a universally blanket statement. How do you stop emotional spending? But what she really wants to know is how do I recognize that connection between my emotion, whether it's overwhelm or sadness or joy, because even joy is an emotion that we tend to
Mm-hmm.
spend with. And how do I recognize the connection between that and my reaction, which tends to be spending something? And, God bless her, she didn't even say like where she spends her money or what it's on or anything like that. So that's how I know she recognizes that there is just a general connection. And how do I shift that? Now, one of the things we want to do is we don't want to get rid of the emotions, and we don't want to get rid of spending altogether, because even though she's in a no spend group, we know we can't physically get rid of spending everything. But she wants to know how to do that in a healthier manner. How do we do that in a way that is more productive? Isn't the right word, but maybe you can find one for me. How do we do that in a way that works for her and serves her in a
More
beneficial? Yeah, let's
beneficial.
go with that. How do we do that in a way that's more beneficial and intentional?
Yeah. A clarifying point real quick. At the beginning, she said my biggest challenge is emotional eating. So I think the spend is probably on
Yeah,
food,
good call.
right? And then she says, i.e., takeaways, which I'm taking as
Probably.
takeout. This is a international group, and I'm one of the least cultured people on the planet, so I just had never heard it
Honestly,
as
it could have just been an
takeaways. But
autocorrect too, because that has happened to me where it just autofills and
like,
I don't check it. So either way, I think you're correct. It probably is takeout food.
yeah, and so to your point about you cannot eliminate
Mm-hmm.
spending on food.
Mm-hmm.
We need food to live, right? So we're not going to eliminate the spend. So it's not a no spend. It's more of a intentional spend. So how do I spend with intentionality, with purpose when I'm dealing with overwhelm? And this just came to mind. Like, I did not pre-plan this. It just Spirit put it on me right now. But when you're dealing with this type of overwhelm, instead of a no spend, let's go with an intentional spend, and maybe you intentionally spend on a good therapist, and you start talking to somebody, and you start having conversations, and you start to bring all of this turmoil. Okay, hold on. It's not just turmoil, right? So to your point, in November, my last child was born. Joy and
Mm-hmm.
jubilation, right? Like, I pray that that's the experience, right? And it is like, wow, I'm so joyful. This newborn baby, that's awesome. But that can also be overwhelming, right? Like, having a newborn means a, a lot less sleep and a very unorthodox, now I'm losing my words, schedule, right? Where it's like every couple of hours you're up and you're caring for baby and all that stuff. So there's a lot of joy, but there's a lot of overwhelm. But then there is the loss and the heartache and the turmoil of losing a loved one in December. And so maybe the intentional spend here is not a no spend at all. It's maybe if you can start talking to somebody and you can start to process all of these emotions that you've been feeling and all of these events that have taken place, then the byproduct of that would be that you don't eat out as much because you're finding healthier ways to cope with all of the things that you're experiencing.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I would like to just throw in from the female aspect of this that when you have a baby, it's not just the the weird schedule that can throw you off. I mean, the amount of hormones that are going on, that the amount of emotions that are just not even typical. It's they're normal. That's why I didn't want to say they weren't normal. They are normal, but they're not maybe your typical type of emotions, and those will play into any of this. So this scenario where she has the death and the funeral, but also has the joy of the wedding and stuff. Those are all things that she may be reacting to differently than she would typically, just because of the way that her body's reacting to all sorts of things. And so there is that part of it as well. And also your body, as a woman who has just given birth, has different nutritional needs. And oftentimes, especially like if she's a nursing mom, she will need to eat more. And so it layers these challenges, I think, where it's like, well, you do need to eat more, but if that's one of the things that you feel oftentimes sends you down the wrong path, it can conflict, if that makes any sense. And so I want to give Heather some grace and say, like, don't say that you're stupidly doing some of this. Some of this might just be your body reacting in a way that you've not yet realized how it all works. And that didn't sound right. That, not that you don't know how it all works, but that we're not always just aware that our body is doing this thing because we know differently in different circumstances. So just wanted to throw that out as well. That it might not be something that needs specifically therapy, but certainly to your point, that it someone to listen to and help process through some of this. And like I said, give yourself some grace, because you're actually doing a really good job with what you have so far. And just want you to know that.
Hey there, budgeteers. You know, good news can only be good news if there's bad news. So, what's the bad news? The bad news is you and I have a deadly disease called sin, and this disease causes us to rebel and disobey God. See, God is holy, righteous, and just, and He cannot be in the presence of sin. So, this horrible disease of ours separates us from the God who created us. And the bad news gets worse. There isn't anything you or I can do to make ourselves right with God. We are dead in our sins and on our way to an eternity separated from God. But that's not God's will for us. See, for God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, that whoever believes in Him should not perish but have everlasting life. God did what only God could do. He made a way for us to be reconciled to Him through Jesus Christ. Jesus came into the world to save sinners like you and me. While we were still sinners, storing up God's anger against us for our rebellion and disobedience, Christ died for us. Jesus took the punishment that you and I deserve and have earned. Jesus is the substitute for your punishment and mine. Now, isn't that some good news? The word gospel means good news. The gospel of Jesus Christ is that you and I broke God's law and Jesus paid the fine. When we place our faith and trust in Jesus, we get to experience God's grace and mercy. Our gratitude should turn us from our rebellious and disobedient sin toward God, seeking after Him and His righteousness. When we do, God gives us a new heart and a new mind. Praise God for His goodness, and remember, God loves, humans sin, Jesus saves.
First of all, we got to give ourselves grace, right? But then the people around us got to give us some grace. You know, she does have a newborn, and, you know, that happened during the holiday season and into the new year. And so I think what you just identified bears repeating around your circumstances have changed. There's complexity to this. It's nuanced, right? This isn't just like somebody who is just kind of willy-nilly, like life is just the same as it has been for years and I just need to do something different because I'm in this rut or whatever. Heather specifically has a lot going on that's new. And that new is also nuanced. And to your point, right, like if you're a nursing mother who your body's going to start to tell you, like, I need more, right? I need more for my own energy, but also to nurse this child and that sort of thing. And so to your other point about like maybe not being aware of that, not being consciously aware of like, oh, right, hold on a second. I'm a nursing mom. It means my body and my baby's body are going to need things that they don't typically. Love to the fact, you know, we're differentiating between normal and typical, right? I might not typically need that, but right now that's very normal for me to need that because I'm a nursing mother. Like, and really reflecting on the nuance of that so that so somebody like Heather can look at their situation and say, okay, these are the things that are going on. These are the nuances of my situation. And again, it's how do I move forward in a healthy and beneficial way? So I don't know that Heather is like me in this, but I think about oftentimes when people think that they need to lose weight or eat healthier, somehow that gets tied to quantity. And so her body might be telling her, no, I need you to up the quantity, while her mind is telling her, oh, like you got to reduce the quantity. And so there's this conflict going on where it's like the body's saying one thing, the mind is saying something else. And the reality might be as you move to a healthier overall diet, and I don't mean diet by like you're going to put
Mhm.
yourself on a diet. It's like, no, I'm just going to choose differently. The more you can choose quality, then you can also have quantity. And you and I have talked about how my wife and I started the carnivore diet, and one of the things I love about this is I don't have to concern myself with the quantity of food that I'm eating because I know the quality of the food I'm
Mhm.
eating is good. And so, yeah, it's very nuanced and there's many layers to it. And I just appreciate the fact that we're taking some time to try to pull back some of those layers and expose some of the nuance
Yeah.
that's
And
going on
also,
there.
I think that when people put this kind of stuff out there, they're looking for answers. And they're they don't always know what answers they're looking for, so they just use some of the language around what, again, we're getting kind of back to where we started, that they are thinking that people are expecting them to use. And it kind of, in my mind, goes back to the whole values thing. Heather might not be a nursing mom. I don't know. So we just kind of threw that out there as a potential thing.
Mm-hmm.
But regardless of that, there are certain things that she values and that are important to her, and those things are likely different than the things that are important to the 185,000 people who are in that group, because each person has individual likes and needs and values. And so what you were mentioning earlier was the need for her to be able to look at what those things are in her individual situation, and try to figure out some of this with that in mind. So anybody who posts here, just for the record, recognize it. And you and I have actually gone through a couple of posts before where we look at what the poster writes, and then we look at the responses, and we're looking at each other going, did they read what they wrote? Like, did they actually take time to read the questions,
Right.
not just the final question? Because in this case, if someone just went straight to the final question and they start throwing out all this advice, all these answers to the question, they're not going to be useful answers because it's not addressing the actual question behind the question. So,
All right, Maria. So, what can Heather or any listener who might be in a nuanced situation like Heather, what's a healthy next step that they can take?
well, I would say, rather than putting this out into a huge group, find a way to ask somebody who's trusted. And I know that that's probably a lot more vulnerable than putting it out in a giant group, because even though Heather did not do this anonymously, it's sometimes easier to ask very personal and intimate questions from a group of people that will never really know you. And even if the responses are something that are hard for us to hear, I think that this is something that is a little easier, because if we hear responses that we don't like, we can easily reject those as saying, well, this is from somebody who doesn't even know me, right? And I
Mm,
think that Heather, if she knows somebody who she trusts and can ask some of these questions. So obviously, let's just say Heather's not even listening. But somebody who's listening today has something similar to this, and this might be a post that you would write. I would say, do some of the stuff that we just talked about today. Unpack it a little bit. Ask yourself, what is the underlying question? And what are some of the insights that you have about your own situation? And then find somebody who truly knows you and is able to listen to you and figure out some of this for you.
yeah. In the past, we've talked about um, finding someone who is willing to tell you the truth,
In a loving way.
right? And
Hmm.
and that might be, yes, in a loving way, very important. And so sometimes that can be difficult. And so, at the risk of sounding self-serving, I do want to remind our listeners that we do offer a free consultation that you can sit down with Maria or myself or any one of the New Money Habit coaches to maybe find that balance between I want to be vulnerable and I want to open up about it, but doing so with somebody in my own
Or
social circle, maybe there's not a trusted person that they can do that with, that, you know, they can sit down with somebody like you or I, and we'll find a very loving way to tell them the truth. And we'll also take the time, like we did today, to try to unpack what's really going on before we just start spouting out, well, you should do this and you should do that, and this is how this is going to work, and this, start doing that. Like, no, we'll take the time to listen and kind of hear
that's a
what's
really
going on.
good point. I think, because what I was saying is find somebody who knows you, and it might be a little bit more vulnerable, but because it's also vulnerable, and there's that but in there, it might be a little difficult to allow that person to really speak to you. And so what you're suggesting is kind of a good compromise between throwing something out to a bajillion people who don't know you, bringing it back to one or two people who don't truly know you, and allowing that person to help you know yourself a little bit and draw out of you what it is that's actually going on. And that might actually kind of pave the way to be able to speak with, whether it's your spouse or somebody who's in your inner social circle, in a different way later on. So I think that's a really good suggestion.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again for taking the time. I really appreciated this conversation. I look forward to doing a little bit more of this, where we can help unpack what's really going on with some of these posts, because I know we have a couple of others queued up, and I'm looking forward to those conversations.
Always a
in the
pleasure.
future.
Thanks for having me.
That does it for this episode of the New Money Habits podcast. Remember, if you have any questions, make sure to hit us up on social at New Money Habits, and follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Please consider leaving a 5-star rating and review to help us spread this message of hope to people looking for a better plan for their money.